Joe and Mika may have gotten a little more than they bargained for recently with a guest appearance by Professor Scott Galloway, who unloaded on the ultra-rich and warned that the current oligarchic path risked revolution.
Once you get above a certain level of wealth, you get no incremental happiness. So why on earth would you not go back to a tax policy of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where, say, above, pick a big number, 10 million, you actually pay more than 10%, maybe more than 20%, maybe more than 50%, because the difference between 30,000 a year for a household and 50,000 is enormous to the well-being of that household. Low-income kids in low-income households have higher resting blood pressure, but the difference between making 10 million a year and 15 million a year offers you no happiness. But these individuals have weaponized government, and we risk revolution, whether it's CEOs being murdered in the street, whether it's a Me Too movement that had righteous components of it, or Black Lives Matter. What are these movements? They are targeting the wealthy. We are in the midst of a series of small revolutions to correct income inequality. And the reason we put an insurrectionist and a rapist in office is because for the first time in our nation's history, a 30-year-old man or woman isn't doing as well as his or her parents were at 30. Why? Because the majority of households are having the oxygen sucked out of the room, such that a small number of individuals and a small number of companies can be worth more than nation states. Income inequality is out of control. Our tax policy has gone full oligarch.
Full oligarch. Galloway here lays out some pretty undeniable truths that are seldom heard on mainstream airwaves. The results of unchecked capitalism colliding with unlimited money in politics are playing out in front of our eyes every single day. And the outcome? It's nothing less than annihilating catastrophe. We've rushed headlong into an era of full-on zero-sum, dog-eat-dog politics, both between individuals and between nation-states. The apocalyptic LA fires and the response to those fires are a perfect case in point. So first, let's start with the basics here. Whatever legitimate criticisms there are of the political response from Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass, the primary driver of this LA catastrophe was extreme weather fueled by climate change, something that no state, even one as large as California, can possibly fight on their own. In fact, the data from last year just dropped at the same time as the wildfires, confirming 2024 was, once again, the hottest year on record, that it was the first year to breach a 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.7 degree Fahrenheit increase from pre-industrial times. What's more, the last 10 years were all the hottest 10 years on record, lest you think that this jump was an anomaly. Wildfires are but one of the catastrophes which have increased in frequency and severity thanks to human-fueled climate change. Researchers have taken a look at these specific wildfires in LA and found that man-made impacts are the predominant cause of this catastrophe. In other words, the Santa Ana winds, they aren't the anomaly. The hotter air and drought conditions driven by climate change are what really made this horror. Now, climate change and its attendant catastrophes are best understood as a consequence of oligarchy, both in terms of the emissions, which have led us to this era of routine catastrophe, and in terms of the lack of sufficient response. Remember, oil and gas executives at Exxon, they knew that carbon-based fuels were the primary driver of climate change nearly 50 years ago, back in 1977. Instead, though, of acknowledge an unprofitable truth, they engaged in a web of lies and deceit, a massive cover-up to keep the public from understanding the consequences of carbon emissions. They even enlisted in this cover-up some of the very same consultants that the tobacco industry used to lie about the link between their product and cancer. While it is no longer tenable to out-and-out deny climate change, this cover-up and obfuscation continues to this day, but with more sophisticated strategies. A couple years back, a lobbyist who thought he was being interviewed for a job was caught on a secret recording by Greenpeace UK explaining ExxonMobil's tactics for blocking action, like, for example, backing solutions they understand to be politically infeasible, like an across-the-board carbon tax. He also explained the way that they buy politicians and use those politicians as their pawns.
A man boasting at a job interview? Or a never-seen-before look at how big oil tries to manipulate big power? Or both? First, the targets. Congressmen are fish. Exxon is the fisherman.
When you have an opportunity to talk to a member of Congress, you know, I liken it to fishing, right? You have bait, you throw that bait out, it's all these opportunities that you use, and to use the fishing analogy again, just to kind of reel them in, because they're a captive audience. They know they need you and I need them.
Senators pressed to do Exxon's bidding behind closed doors.
You want to be able to go to the chief. Yeah. And so the chief knows you, that you can go to the chief and say, look, we've got this issue. We need Congressman so-and-so to be able to introduce this bill. We need him to make a floor statement. We need him to send a letter. You name it. We've asked for everything.
But it's not just the fossil fuel executives who have an interest in the status quo. The new tech oligarchs are equally interested in downplaying the climate crisis. This even applies to Elon Musk, who of course founded an electric vehicle company. First of all, implementing an adequate climate response would require upfront federal government spending and a strong federal government. Two things the ultra-wealthy absolutely hate because they want to keep their taxes low, and the government too weak to interfere in their business crimes and monopolies. But the tech oligarchs have another massive business interest. Essentially, every large tech company that you've heard of and plenty that you haven't are engaged in an arms race to rapidly develop AI and push towards AGI, or artificial general intelligence. The amount of carbon emissions this race is fueling is quite vast. Few companies offer transparency about the energy required to train and run their tools, but research suggests it's extraordinarily energy intensive. In fact, Google blamed a 48% increase in emissions on its AI development. Microsoft had a similar explanation for its 29% increase in emissions. As NPR writes, quote, Goldman Sachs has researched the expected growth of data centers in the U.S. and estimates they'll be using 8% of total power in the country by 2030. That's up from 3% in 2022. Company analysts say, quote, the proliferation of AI technology in the data centers necessary to feed it will drive a surge in power demand, the likes of which has not been seen in a generation. But the oligarchs' grip on our government doesn't only block efforts to deal with climate change. As the ultra-wealthy's taxes drop near zero and a weak government allows their monopolies to flourish, fueling massive inequality, the need to forcibly keep the peasants from finding their pitchforks also increases. That imperative, more than anything else, is what has driven an ever-expanding surveillance and police state. That's why even as our politicians insist we can't afford to deal with climate or to provide healthcare or affordable childcare or free college or world-class infrastructure, there is a never-ending spigot of money for any agency filled with people with guns used to discipline the population. That includes, of course, the military, FBI, CIA, Border Patrol, and, of course, local police forces. So returning to our Hollywood horror, LA spent $1.73 billion on the police department in the last fiscal year, and Mayor Karen Bass upped that funding to $1.99 billion in the current fiscal year for a roughly $130 million increase. Once state and federal monies are included in that overall department budget, it is well over $3 billion. Meanwhile, the fire department budget was cut, something that turns out to be rather crucial in this moment. But never you mind, since state prison inmates are being pressed into service as firefighters, risking their lives for $10 per day to save homes for billionaires who largely view them as animals. And while the police that predominantly criminalize the poor are kitted up with military gear and fat budgets in Democrat and Republican cities alike, the kind of police which could curb oligarch financial crimes, they are under constant attack. It is no accident that both Mark Zuckerberg and Andreessen went on Rogan's podcast to trash the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which has been inconvenient for both of their bottom lines. Musk and others have also taken aim at the Securities Exchange Commission, which has dared to regulate crypto and to investigate Musk for market manipulation. Now, Musk, the oligarch king himself, has been given a direct commission to shape and slash the government in areas where it might, theoretically, check his power. You can bet any agencies involved in suppression of what Galloway described as mini-revolutions will continue to be well-funded, even as other agencies like the EPA and the National Labor Relations Board, which Musk believes is unconstitutional, are starved. Elon is one of the Pentagon's top contractors, so you're a fool if you think that budget is going to face any real cuts under him. Instead, his wealth and those of the other favored oligarchs will continue to escalate, reaching new heights never before seen in human history. AI will revolutionize wealth extraction and consolidate even more wealth and power at the very top. And that's to say nothing of the giant tax cut Trump has already promised these billionaires. And as these billionaires become increasingly untouchable, even by nation stage, each one individually too big to fail, they will go to greater and greater lengths to insulate themselves from the consequences of the globe being run exclusively for their benefit. This, too, we see playing out in LA. Hamilton Nolan wrote an excellent piece on this dynamic titled, quote, Lifeboat Capitalism, some burn, some drown, and some make money either way. In the piece, he writes that we have a choice to either confront the impacts from climate change together or separately. Together as a nation, helping each other in as egalitarian a way as possible, or in a Darwinian dog-eat-dog scramble for resources where the rich and the well-connected always come out on top of the pile. Of the latter option, he says, quote, we know what that will look like, don't we? It will look like rich people paying any price for private firefighters to save their mansions as all around them burn. It will look like rich people wrangling government bailouts for their washed-away beach houses as poor people inland languish in the muck. It looks like large swaths of America becoming uninsurable and then being left to only the very rich who are willing to take the risk and the very poor who can't afford to do anything else. It looks like climate refugees crowding our streets, refugees from poorer countries and then also refugees from our own country. Looks like wealthier people building walls around their safe land and then writing checks to politicians who will tell the panicked middle-class people that the poor people are coming to take their place. We can either work to build more lifeboats and to make humane rules about who gets on them, or we can just let the strong people toss the weaker people into the water and sail away. Either by action or by inaction, our government is going to effectively choose one or the other. I don't have to tell you which choice is being made in the current political dynamic. Look around. Billionaires building bunkers, learning to fight, buying properties in New Zealand, building literal spaceships in case they need to flee this doomed civilization altogether, buying entire social media platforms to spread a warped version of reality which always happens to align with their own interests. They've decided to roll the dice, that they'll be able to personally escape the consequences of the world that they themselves set up using their wealth and power as a shield. And to return briefly to Scott Galloway, whose video we started this monologue with, well, he can apparently see these dynamics pretty clearly when it comes to the US context. He is completely blind when it comes to the same dog-eat-dog dynamics which are presently ascendant on the global stage. He celebrated Israel's genocidal actions in Gaza. Their unrestrained barbarity, backed by the global superpower, has helped to cement a global order that mirrors the zero-sum Darwinian scramble that increasingly characterizes our domestic life. Might makes right. The strong will brazenly and brutally gobble up whatever resources they possibly can, with military budget ever expanding to try to make sure that no other nations might get to have a say. These wars for resources are frequently also driven by the insatiable appetites and needs of the oligarch class, whose children are never the ones sent to fight and die. In other words, oligarchy is the issue that connects all other issues: war, climate, poverty, censorship, democracy. It's no accident that as the ultra-wealthy have pulled away into a superclass of global masters, we become unable to solve a single problem that really requires collective action. Instead, we'll have to watch the fires burn and pray our loved ones are not in the disaster zone this time. And Saagar, this is a more...
Hey guys, if you want to see what I had to say to Krystal's monologue, not just this one, all of them, going back to the very beginning, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com.